found out my wife was telling her sister how to help her hide assets before divorcing me, so I beat her to it and filed first while she was busy planning my downfall. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of timing that reveals exactly who someone really is when you least expect it. I thought I was building a future with my partner, but I was actually funding my own destruction. Nicole and I had been married for 3 years, and I genuinely believed we were solid, the kind of couple that other people envied at dinner parties. I'm a software developer here in Charlotte, nothing flashy but stable income around $95,000, and she worked in real estate with what seemed like a promising career trajectory. We'd been talking about renovating our kitchen and master bathroom for months, one of those projects that would really make our house feel like home. Nicole had been pushing for it pretty consistently, showing me Pinterest boards and contractor estimates, talking about how it would increase our property value and give us the space we'd always dreamed of. Being the practical guy I am, I'd been picking up extra freelance projects to build up our renovation fund, staying up late coding mobile apps for local businesses, building websites for startups, basically anything that could bring in an additional $2,000 to $3,000 per month. The plan was to save up about $40,000 so we could do the renovation right without going into debt, and I was actually getting excited about the whole thing. Nicole seemed genuinely appreciative of my extra work, always telling me how much she loved that I was such a planner, such a provider, always thinking about our future together. She'd bring me coffee during those late-night coding sessions and talk about how amazing our house was going to look, how proud she was to be married to someone who worked so hard for what we wanted. It was during one of those late-night freelance sessions around 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday in October when my entire world shifted. I was in the home office debugging some particularly frustrating code for a client's inventory management system, wearing noise-canceling headphones but with the volume low because I was expecting an important email notification. Nicole was supposed to be asleep, but I could hear her voice coming from our bedroom. She was obviously on a video call with someone, speaking in that animated whisper people use when they're trying to be quiet but getting excited about something. I initially thought she might be talking to her mom about some family drama, but then I heard her sister Rachel's voice coming through clearly, and something about their tone made me pause my work and actually listen. The timing has to be perfect, Nicole was saying, because once he figures out what's happening, he's going to try to protect everything. Rachel responded with something I couldn't quite catch, but then Nicole continued, "We've already talked about this. The money needs to move before he has any idea there's a problem. You've got the business account set up under your name, right?" My blood went cold because our savings account had been growing steadily with my freelance money, and I'd never discussed any business account with Rachel or anyone else. I quietly removed my headphones and moved closer to our bedroom door, my heart hammering as I realized this conversation was about me and our money. Rachel's voice came through the phone speaker. "The Delaware LC is established, and I've got the cryptocurrency wallet ready. How much are we talking about transferring initially?" Nicole's response made my stomach drop. "At least $35,000 from the joint savings, plus I've got about $22,000 in commission money he doesn't know about that I've been keeping separate. The beauty is he thinks I'm terrible with money, so he never questions my finances." They were talking about hiding assets, my assets, money I'd been working 60-hour weeks to save for our dream renovation. "What about the inheritance money from his grandfather?" Rachel asked, and Nicole actually laughed before answering. "Already moved most of that last month. He thinks it's in our emergency fund, but it's sitting in the offshore account waiting to be transferred." I stood there in complete shock because my grandfather had left me $18,000 when he died 8 months ago, money I'd specifically earmarked for our future, money I told Nicole was sacred to me because it represented my grandfather's final gift to our marriage. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, and I heard every devastating detail. Nicole had been systematically hiding real estate commissions for over a year, underreporting her income and stashing money in accounts I knew nothing about. Rachel had established multiple business entities designed specifically to hold Nicole's assets, in preparation for what they kept calling the transition. They discussed timeline strategies, talked about how long Nicole should maintain the pretense of a happy marriage while securing her financial position, and debated the best way to make me look like the bad guy when she eventually filed for divorce. "He's so trusting and naive," Nicole said at one point. He actually thinks I want this renovation. The poor guy has been killing himself with extra work, and he has no idea he's funding his own divorce. Rachel's response was even worse. Men like him never see it coming. They think being a good provider means you deserve loyalty, but sometimes you have to protect yourself from their expectations. I realized I'd been holding my breath during most of this conversation, standing in my own hallway like an intruder in my own life. These two women had been planning my financial destruction for months, possibly longer, while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to build something beautiful for us. Nicole wasn't just planning to leave me, she was planning to destroy me financially and emotionally, to take everything I'd worked for and leave me with nothing but confusion and heartbreak. The renovation fund, the inheritance money, probably our emergency savings and anything else she could get her hands on, it was all part of an elaborate scheme to secure her future at the complete expense of mine. I stood there in the dark hallway of my own home, listening to my wife and her sister plot against me with the kind of casual cruelty that takes years to develop, and I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage had been a carefully constructed lie. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of cold clarity that comes from having your entire worldview shattered in a single night. Nicole was making coffee like nothing had happened, humming some song while she scrolled through her phone, probably checking messages with Rachel about their latest schemes. "Morning, babe," she said with that same sweet smile I'd fallen in love with. "How late were you up working last night? I thought I heard you moving around." I looked at this woman who'd been systematically planning my destruction while I worked myself ragged to make her happy, and I felt something fundamental shift inside me, not anger exactly, but a kind of strategic determination I'd never experienced before. "Just trying to hit our savings target," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly normal. "Every extra project gets us closer to that renovation you want." She actually had the audacity to kiss my cheek and tell me how lucky she felt to have such a hardworking husband, and I realized that my software development skills weren't just useful for building apps, they were about to become essential for building an airtight case against her fraud. That day at work, instead of focusing on my regular projects, I started researching everything I could about asset protection, divorce law in North Carolina, and digital forensics. I reached out to Mike Chin, a lawyer friend from college who specialized in family law, and scheduled what I told him was a hypothetical consultation about protecting assets in a marriage. Mike was sharp enough to read between the lines immediately. "Alex, if this isn't actually hypothetical, you need to move fast and document everything," he said. "North Carolina is an equitable distribution state, but fraud is fraud, and if you can prove premeditated deception, the court will take that very seriously." I also contacted Sarah Mitchell, a forensic accountant that Mike recommended, someone who specialized in tracing hidden assets and uncovering financial deception in divorce cases. "The key," Sarah explained during our confidential meeting, "is documenting the pattern of deception before they realize you know anything. Once they suspect you're onto them, they'll accelerate their timeline and become much more careful about covering their tracks." For the next 3 weeks, I became a master of pretense while building my counter-strategy. Every evening, I continued my freelance work but started routing all payments through a new business account that Nicole knew nothing about, a legitimate trust account that Sarah helped me establish for asset protection. I installed discrete recording software on my home office computer and strategically placed my phone to capture conversations when Nicole talked to Rachel, building a comprehensive audio library of their planning sessions. The conversations I recorded were absolutely damning. Detailed discussions about moving specific amounts of money, strategies for hiding real estate commissions from me and the IRS, and even backup plans for what to do if I got suspicious before everything was secured. Nicole continued to encourage my extra work, bringing me late-night snacks and talking about how amazing our renovated kitchen was going to look, while I documented every lie with the methodical precision that made me good at debugging complex software problems. The most revealing conversation I captured happened on a Thursday night in early November, when Rachel called Nicole in a panic about something related to the Delaware LLC. "The accountant is asking questions about the source of funds," Rachel said, her voice tight with stress. "We might need to slow down the transfers and make them smaller amounts." Nicole's response was chilling. "We can't slow down. He's been working like crazy on these freelance projects, And I think he's getting close to having enough saved to actually start the renovation. Once he spends that money on contractors and materials, it's gone forever. We need to move it before he locks it up in home improvements. They were racing against my own productivity, trying to steal my money before I could spend it on the very project they'd convinced me to save for. I realized that every extra hour I worked, every sacrifice I made for our supposed shared dreams, was actually accelerating their timeline for betraying me. By late November, I had everything I needed: recorded evidence of fraud, documentation of hidden accounts, proof of tax evasion, and a comprehensive financial picture that Sarah had helped me assemble. The forensic accounting revealed that Nicole had been systematically underreporting her real estate income for over 18 months, hiding approximately $45,000 in commissions while claiming to me that her career was struggling. She'd also diverted my grandfather's inheritance money into cryptocurrency accounts controlled by Rachel, money that was supposed to be sitting safely in our joint savings account. Mike had prepared all the necessary legal documents, and we'd developed a strategy that would freeze their scheme in its tracks while protecting my assets and exposing their fraud to both the court system and the IRS. The perfect opportunity came on December 3rd, when Nicole announced over dinner that she'd been feeling overwhelmed by our relationship and thought we should consider a trial separation. "I just need some space to figure out what I really want," she said, using the same tone she'd used to discuss what to order for lunch. "Maybe I could stay with Rachel for a few weeks while we both think about where we're heading." I knew from the recorded conversations that this was the signal. Rachel had been pressuring her to accelerate the final asset transfers, and they needed me out of the house or emotionally distracted while they moved the remaining money. "That sounds like a reasonable idea," I replied calmly. Sometimes space helps people gain perspective on what really matters to them. Nicole actually looked relieved that I wasn't fighting her on it, probably thinking I was going to make their final phase of the plan much easier than they'd anticipated. What Nicole didn't know was that while she was packing her bags for what she thought would be a strategic retreat to finalize stealing my money, I was finalizing paperwork that would destroy her entire scheme. On December 5th, the same day Rachel had transferred an additional $8,000 from our joint account into their cryptocurrency wallet, a process server handed Nicole divorce papers, a restraining order on all our joint accounts, and a notification that the court had frozen all assets pending a full financial investigation. The look on her face was absolutely priceless. Pure shock mixed with the kind of panic that comes from realizing your carefully orchestrated plan has just exploded in your face. "Alex, what is this?" she demanded, holding the papers like they might burst into flames. "This is me beating you to the punch," I replied. "Turns out I'm better at strategy games than you thought." The next 48 hours were absolute chaos as Nicole's carefully constructed world collapsed in real time. She immediately called Rachel, screaming into the phone about frozen accounts and legal papers, while I calmly explained to both of them that all their conversations had been recorded and were now evidence in a fraud investigation. "You can't use those recordings," Nicole shrieked, pacing around our living room like a caged animal. "Those were private conversations taken completely out of context." I watched her with the same detached interest I'd used to observe a particularly fascinating bug, someone whose true nature had been revealed so completely that I almost felt sorry for her panic. "Actually," I said, consulting the legal documents Mike had prepared, "North Carolina is a one-party consent state, which means I can legally record any conversation I'm present for or that occurs in my own home. And context is exactly what makes these recordings so damaging. There's no ambiguous way to interpret planning asset transfers to hide money from your spouse." Nicole's strategy shifted immediately from denial to victimization, a playbook move that would have been more effective if I hadn't spent weeks documenting her real intentions. "Alex has been controlling our finances for years," she told anyone who would listen, including her parents, our mutual friends, and apparently her real estate broker. "He monitors every penny I spend and makes me feel like I have to hide money just to maintain some independence." I was protecting myself from financial abuse. The irony was absolutely stunning. The woman who'd been systematically stealing my inheritance money and hiding her income was now claiming that I was financially abusive because I'd managed our joint savings responsibly. When her mother called me, clearly having been fed a completely fabricated version of events, I simply said, "Mrs. Patterson, I've got recorded evidence of Nicole planning to hide assets and commit tax fraud. If she's told you I'm financially controlling, ask her to explain why she hid $45,000 in real estate commissions while I worked overtime to save money for house renovations she never intended to complete. Rachel escalated the situation in ways that proved these sisters were absolutely cut from the same cloth of deception and manipulation. Within a week of the legal papers being served, she'd hired Marcus Webb, a private investigator who specialized in what he euphemistically called reputation management, basically digging up dirt on people to use as leverage in legal disputes. Marcus contacted my former girlfriends, my college roommates, even my high school teachers, fishing for anything that could paint me as unstable, controlling, or financially irresponsible. The most pathetic part was that he came up empty because the worst thing anyone could say about me was that I worked too much and occasionally forgot to return text messages promptly. Rachel also started filing complaints with my freelance clients, claiming I'd engaged in professional misconduct and breach of contract, hoping to damage my income and reputation simultaneously. She contacted Dataflow Solutions, telling them I'd violated client confidentiality by discussing their project details with competitors, which was completely fabricated. She called Pinnacle Marketing and claimed I'd missed critical deadlines and delivered substandard work, despite the fact that they'd already recommended me to 3 other companies. Mike absolutely demolished these desperate tactics in court, using our recorded evidence to demonstrate a clear pattern of premeditated fraud and retaliation. Your Honor, he said during our first hearing, the defendant's current strategy of attacking Mr. Thompson's character and professional reputation is simply an extension of the same deceptive behavior documented in these recordings. Rather than addressing the substantial evidence of asset concealment and tax evasion, they're attempting to distract from their criminal conduct by fabricating claims about Mr. Thompson's behavior. The judge listened to selected portions of the Nicole-Rachel planning sessions, including the particularly damning conversation where they discussed hiding my grandfather's inheritance money and timing their asset transfers to avoid detection. Judge Martinez wasn't having any of their nonsense. She immediately expanded the asset freeze to include all accounts held under Rachel's name and ordered both sisters to provide complete financial documentation going back 2 years. The real entertainment came when Nicole was forced to explain thousands of dollars in hidden real estate commissions during her deposition. Sarah, our forensic accountant, had traced every transaction with surgical precision, and Nicole's attempts at explanation were absolutely pathetic to witness. I was saving that money as a surprise for Alex, she claimed, despite recorded evidence of her telling Rachel that the money was specifically being hidden to secure her own future. When asked why she'd lied about her income on our joint tax returns, she claimed she'd forgotten about several commission payments totaling over $23,000. Mrs. Thompson, Mike said with barely concealed amusement, you forgot about $23,000 in income? That seems like a substantial amount to simply slip your mind. Nicole's lawyer, clearly realizing his client was completely screwed, started suggesting settlement negotiations before the criminal referrals could be processed. The most satisfying moment came when Rachel tried to claim she'd been an unwilling participant in Nicole's scheme, forced to help her sister because of emotional manipulation and family pressure. Mike played the recording where Rachel enthusiastically suggested using cryptocurrency wallets to make the money harder to trace, followed immediately by her excited discussion of tax avoidance strategies she'd researched specifically for this plan. Does this sound like someone being coerced, Your Honor? Mike asked. Or does this sound like an active co-conspirator who was equally invested in defrauding Mr. Thompson? The judge's expression said everything about how seriously she was taking Rachel's victim act, and I knew these sisters had completely underestimated both the legal system and my ability to outmaneuver their amateur-hour fraud scheme. What we discovered during the formal financial investigation was so much worse than anything I'd overheard in those late-night phone conversations. Sarah's forensic accounting work revealed that Nicole and Rachel hadn't just been planning to steal from me for a few months. They'd been systematically running this asset-hiding operation for over 2 years, dating back to early in our marriage when I'd still been naive enough to think Nicole's financial struggles were just temporary career challenges. The Delaware shell companies Rachel had established weren't recent panic moves. They were sophisticated business entities with detailed operating agreements, separate tax identification numbers, and carefully structured ownership arrangements designed specifically to hide assets from spousal discovery. This wasn't some desperate scheme they cooked up recently, Sarah explained during one of our strategy meetings. This was a long-term operation with multiple layers of deception and legal structure behind it. They've been planning your financial destruction since practically the beginning of your marriage. The most devastating revelation came when Sarah traced my grandfather's inheritance money, the $18,000 that had meant everything to me because it represented his final blessing on my marriage and future. Nicole hadn't just moved that money recently, she'd been systematically draining it for over 8 months, starting just 2 weeks after the inheritance cleared our joint account. The bank records showed a careful pattern of transfers. $2,000 moved to an account under Rachel's name, then $3,500 to a cryptocurrency wallet, then another $4,200 to something called Patterson Holdings LLC, one of Rachel's shell companies that existed solely to hide money from me. "She was stealing from your grandfather's grave," Mike said bluntly, reviewing the transaction history. "While you were grieving and thinking this money was safely saved for your future, she was systematically moving it into accounts you couldn't access or trace." The cruelest part was that I'd specifically told Nicole how much that inheritance meant to me, how I wanted to use it for something meaningful that would honor my grandfather's memory, and she'd looked me in the eye and agreed while already planning to steal every penny. Nicole's real estate commission fraud was equally systematic and damaging. For over 18 months, she'd been operating what amounted to a dual-book system, reporting minimal income to me and our joint tax returns while hiding the majority of her earnings in separate accounts that Rachel managed through the shell companies. When a property sale generated a $8,000 commission, Nicole would report $2,000 to me as her modest success, while secretly moving $6,000 into hidden accounts. She'd been inflating our shared household expenses by claiming higher costs for everything from groceries to utilities, then pocketing the difference when I covered those fabricated amounts. "Your wife wasn't just hiding money," Sarah explained with professional amazement. "She was running a sophisticated embezzlement operation that included falsifying your joint tax returns, creating fraudulent business expenses, and systematically inflating your household costs to extract additional money from your income." The timeline Sarah reconstructed was absolutely chilling in its calculated precision. Nicole had started the asset hiding scheme just 4 months after our wedding, right around the time I'd gotten my first significant promotion and salary increase. Every major milestone in our marriage, my promotion, my grandfather's death, my decision to take on freelance work for the renovation, had been immediately followed by escalations in her fraud activity. When I'd started earning extra money from freelance projects, Nicole had increased the frequency of asset transfers and opened additional cryptocurrency accounts. When my grandfather died and left me the inheritance, she'd accelerated her timeline for moving money offshore. "She was treating your financial success like her personal opportunity fund," Mike observed. "Every time your income grew or you received money, she saw it as a chance to steal more before you could notice patterns or discrepancies." When confronted with this overwhelming evidence during her second deposition, Nicole tried one final desperate lie that was so pathetic it almost made me feel sorry for her. "I was planning to surprise Alex with a fully funded renovation," she claimed, tears streaming down her face in what her lawyer probably hoped would look like genuine remorse. All that money was being saved to pay for the kitchen and bathroom work he wanted so badly. I was going to present him with contractors and materials already paid for as an anniversary gift. It was such an obviously fabricated story that even her own lawyer looked embarrassed, but Sarah demolished it with surgical precision using bank records and transaction timestamps. "Mrs. Thompson," Sarah said calmly, "if you were saving money to surprise your husband with renovations, why were these funds transferred to cryptocurrency accounts under your sister's control? Why were they moved to offshore business entities with no connection to home improvement or construction? And why do your recorded conversations with Rachel specifically discuss hiding these assets from Alex rather than using them for household projects?" Nicole's lawyer actually put his head in his hands when Sarah finished presenting the evidence, probably realizing his client had just committed perjury during a federal investigation. The situation escalated from a messy divorce to a federal criminal investigation when Mike reported the tax evasion evidence to the IRS and the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Nicole and Rachel's cryptocurrency transfers triggered multiple federal monitoring systems designed to detect money laundering and tax avoidance schemes. And suddenly we had Special Agent Jennifer Walsh from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division requesting copies of all our evidence. Mr. Thompson, Agent Walsh explained during our meeting, what your wife and sister-in-law have been doing isn't just divorce fraud. It's systematic tax evasion, money laundering through cryptocurrency, and potentially wire fraud for using interstate banking systems to hide assets. This is now a federal criminal investigation that could result in felony charges for both women. I realized that my quiet documentation project had uncovered what federal agents considered a serious financial crime, and Nicole's attempt to destroy my life was about to destroy hers instead. The final moment of vindication came when Nicole called me directly, violating the restraining order and practically sobbing into the phone about how everything had gotten completely out of control. "Alex, I never meant for this to happen," she said, her voice shaking with what sounded like genuine terror. "The federal agents are talking about criminal charges, and Rachel is blaming everything on me. I just wanted to feel secure, to know I had something that was mine if things ever went wrong between us." I listened to this woman who'd spent years systematically stealing from me now begging for sympathy because her criminal scheme had federal consequences. "Nicole," I said calmly, "you spent 2 years planning my financial destruction. You stole money from my dead grandfather. You filed fraudulent tax returns and ran sophisticated money laundering operations. The only thing that went wrong was that I found out before you could finish destroying my life." The call ended with her crying and me feeling absolutely nothing except relief that I'd never have to trust her with anything important ever again. The federal investigation pressure created exactly the kind of stress that reveals who people really are when their backs are against the wall, and watching Nicole and Rachel turn on each other was like observing a masterclass in criminal desperation. Within a week of Agent Walsh's initial interview, Rachel had retained her own criminal defense attorney and was actively trying to pin the entire operation on Nicole. "My client was manipulated by her sister's emotional instability and desperation," Rachel's lawyer announced during what was supposed to be a joint strategy meeting. Ms. Patterson was led to believe she was helping Nicole protect herself from an abusive husband, not participating in tax fraud or money laundering. I almost laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of Rachel trying to rewrite history when we had dozens of recorded conversations of her enthusiastically suggesting cryptocurrency transfers and researching offshore tax avoidance strategies like she was planning a vacation. The sisterly betrayal reached peak entertainment value when Nicole's forensic accounting review revealed that Rachel had been systematically skimming money from their shared criminal accounts for her own benefit. While Nicole thought they were equal partners in stealing my money, Rachel had been treating the operation like her personal slush fund, keeping nearly $30,000 that was supposed to be held in trust for Nicole's post-divorce financial security. Sarah traced transactions showing Rachel had used the skimmed money to pay off her own credit card debt, make payments on a luxury car lease, and even fund a vacation to the Bahamas that she'd claimed was a business trip for the shell company operations. "Rachel wasn't just helping Nicole commit fraud against you," Sarah explained with professional amazement. "She was simultaneously defrauding Nicole while they were both defrauding you. It's like criminal inception, fraud within fraud within fraud." Nicole's discovery of Rachel's double betrayal led to the kind of explosive confrontation that probably could have been heard from space. My neighbor Mrs. Chen later told me she'd heard screaming from Rachel's apartment that lasted over an hour, with phrases like, "You greedy bitch," and "I trusted you with everything" echoing through the courtyard. But the real shock came when Mike informed me that Rachel had been secretly negotiating with our legal team to provide testimony against Nicole in exchange for immunity from federal prosecution. "She approached us 2 weeks ago," Mike explained, offering to provide detailed information about Nicole's tax evasion and asset hiding in exchange for cooperation credit with the federal investigators. She's apparently kept meticulous records of every transaction, every cryptocurrency transfer, every fraudulent business expense, basically a complete guide to destroying her sister's defense. Rachel had been planning to sacrifice Nicole to save herself from the moment the federal investigation began, which explained why she'd been so quick to claim victim status and distance herself from the scheme's more damaging elements. Nicole's response to discovering Rachel's betrayal was a combination of panic and increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond her management. She started reaching out to my freelance clients and business partners, not to damage my reputation this time, but to offer them bribes for withdrawing their support and testimony. She contacted Dataflow Solutions and offered to pay them $5,000 to claim I'd breached our contract and delivered substandard work, hoping to undermine my credibility as a reliable professional. She called my friend Tom at Pinnacle Marketing and actually offered him $8,000 to say I'd missed critical deadlines and caused their project delays, apparently thinking she could buy enough false testimony to make me look unreliable and financially desperate. The pathetic irony was that these companies immediately reported her bribery attempts to Mike, providing us with additional evidence of criminal behavior and witness tampering. But Nicole's most absolutely desperate and ultimately self-destructive move was claiming she was pregnant with twins, apparently hoping that impending motherhood would generate sympathy from the court and complicate the divorce proceedings. She showed up to our next hearing wearing loose-fitting clothes and claiming morning sickness, telling anyone who would listen that the stress of the investigation was threatening her pregnancy and that I was being cruel by pursuing legal action against the mother of my future children. Your Honor, her lawyer said with what I'm sure he hoped was convincing sincerity, my client is carrying twins and the stress of these proceedings is putting both her health and the babies at serious risk. We request a continuance to allow her to focus on this high-risk pregnancy. Nicole even produced what she claimed were ultrasound images and a letter from a doctor confirming the twin pregnancy and recommending reduced stress for optimal fetal development. Mike absolutely demolished this final lie with the kind of legal precision that made me grateful I'd hired such a competent attorney. He subpoenaed Nicole's complete medical records for the past 6 months, revealing that she'd never been pregnant and had actually received birth control prescriptions as recently as 3 weeks before claiming to be expecting twins. The ultrasound images were stolen from random internet sources and the doctor's letter was completely fabricated, using the letterhead from a gynecologist who'd never treated Nicole and who confirmed she'd never been a patient at their practice. Your Honor, Mike said with barely contained satisfaction, not only is Mrs. Thompson not pregnant with twins, she's not pregnant at all. This appears to be another fraudulent scheme designed to manipulate these proceedings, and we have medical evidence proving her claims are completely false. The judge's reaction to discovering that Nicole had fabricated a pregnancy to avoid consequences for her financial crimes was absolute fury, and I knew that whatever sympathy she might have gained from her victim act had just evaporated completely. Nicole's face when her fake pregnancy was exposed in open court was the final confirmation that she'd run out of lies, manipulation tactics, and desperate schemes. She was finally going to face real consequences for years of systematic deception and theft. The final court ruling came down like the hammer of financial justice, and Judge Martinez didn't hold back in expressing her complete disgust with Nicole and Rachel's systematic fraud operation. In 30 years on the bench, she said while delivering the verdict, I have rarely seen such calculated, premeditated, and extensive financial deception between spouses. Mrs. Thompson and Ms. Patterson have demonstrated a level of criminal sophistication that goes far beyond typical marital disputes and enters the realm of organized financial crime. The court ruled heavily in my favor on every single issue, ordering Nicole to pay back the full $18,000 diverted inheritance money plus 18% annual interest and additional penalties totaling another $7,200. She was also required to return all hidden real estate commissions with interest, pay my legal fees totaling $23,000, and surrender any remaining assets held in the shell companies or cryptocurrency accounts. Nicole literally gasped when the financial penalties were announced, probably realizing that her scheme to secure her future had instead guaranteed years of debt and financial ruin. Rachel received the federal criminal charges that Agent Walsh had been preparing throughout the investigation, including 3 counts of money laundering, 2 counts of tax evasion, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The federal prosecutor had decided to make an example of their sophisticated operation, particularly the cryptocurrency components that demonstrated knowledge of financial crime techniques beyond typical divorce fraud. Ms. Patterson faces up to 15 years in federal prison and fines up to $500,000, Agent Walsh explained to me after the sentencing hearing. Her cooperation against her sister reduced her exposure somewhat, but the evidence of systematic financial crime was too substantial for immunity. Rachel's shell companies were dissolved and all assets were seized by the federal government, meaning that even the money she'd stolen from Nicole was gone forever, leaving both sisters with nothing but legal debt and criminal records. Nicole lost her real estate license within a week of the criminal convictions being finalized, ending a career that had apparently been built on systematic fraud and tax evasion even beyond what she'd done to me. The North Carolina Real Estate Commission conducted their own investigation after the federal charges became public, discovering that Nicole had been underreporting commissions and engaging in tax avoidance schemes with multiple clients over several years. Her license is permanently revoked, the commission investigator informed Mike, and we're referring several additional cases to the IRS for potential prosecution. It appears Mrs. Thompson was operating fraudulent schemes with clients as well as in her personal life. The civil penalties from the Real Estate Commission added another $45,000 in fines to Nicole's growing mountain of legal debt, ensuring that even if she managed to avoid significant prison time, she'd be financially destroyed for years to come. Nicole's final desperate attempt at reconciliation was the most pathetic display of manipulation I'd ever witnessed, combining fake remorse with blame shifting and outright lies about her feelings and intentions. She called me from her mother's house where she was apparently living since losing our home and her income, crying into the phone about how the whole scheme had been Rachel's idea from the beginning. "Alex, I was completely manipulated by my sister," she sobbed, using the same victim script that had failed in court. "Rachel convinced me that you were going to leave me anyway, that I needed to protect myself because you'd eventually find someone younger and abandon me with nothing. I never wanted to hurt you, I love you and I always have. Everything that happened was because I was scared and listening to someone who was using me for her own benefit." The irony of Nicole trying to claim that Rachel had manipulated her while simultaneously trying to manipulate me back into a relationship was absolutely stunning. But Mike had prepared for exactly this kind of last-minute emotional manipulation by subpoenaing Nicole's complete phone and email records, which revealed the devastating truth about when she'd actually started planning our divorce. The digital evidence showed that Nicole had been researching divorce attorneys and asset protection strategies since just 4 months after our wedding, nearly 2.5 years before I discovered her scheme. She'd been exchanging emails with Rachel about exit strategies and securing financial independence since our first anniversary, and had consulted with 3 different divorce lawyers about the best ways to maximize her settlement while minimizing my ability to protect assets. "Mr. Thompson," Mike said, showing me the timeline Sarah had constructed from the digital evidence, "your wife was planning to divorce you and steal your money before you even celebrated your first wedding anniversary. Everything she's saying about being scared or manipulated is complete fabrication designed to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself from her criminal behavior." The divorce was finalized with terms that left Nicole with exactly what she deserved: nothing but her personal belongings and a mountain of legal debt that would follow her for decades. I kept our house, all marital assets, my inheritance money with interest, and complete ownership of the business accounts I'd established to protect my freelance income. Nicole received her clothes, her car until the payment became her responsibility, and legal obligations totaling over $95,000 between federal penalties, court-ordered restitution, civil fines, and attorney fees. "This is probably the most one-sided divorce settlement I've ever negotiated," Mike told me with professional satisfaction. But when one spouse has been systematically defrauding the other for years, the court has very little sympathy for the perpetrator's financial situation. Nicole's lawyer actually shook my hand after the final hearing, apparently impressed by the thoroughness of our evidence and the complete destruction of his client's position. The last image I have of Nicole from our marriage is her crying in the courthouse hallway, finally understanding that her years of calculated deception had resulted in losing everything she'd tried so hard to steal, while I walked away financially intact and completely free from her manipulation forever. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I used the recovered funds and my accumulated freelance income to start Thompson Digital Solutions, my own software development company that specialized in financial security systems and fraud detection applications. The irony wasn't lost on me that Nicole's criminal scheme had inadvertently taught me more about financial fraud prevention than any professional course could have, and I was now building software to help other people protect themselves from exactly the kind of systematic deception she'd practiced. My first major client was a family law firm that wanted fraud detection tools for divorce cases, and my second was a forensic accounting company that needed software to trace hidden cryptocurrency transactions. "You've turned your personal nightmare into a professional advantage," Mike observed when I told him about my business growth. "There's something beautifully poetic about building a career helping people avoid the fraud you survived." Nicole and Rachel were both still fighting their respective legal battles over the criminal charges when the IRS investigation expanded to include other family members who'd apparently been benefiting from their financial crime expertise. Agent Walsh contacted me 6 months after our case closed to inform me that the investigation had uncovered evidence that Rachel had been running similar asset-hiding schemes with her ex-husband and their cousin, using the same Delaware shell companies and cryptocurrency methods she'd developed for Nicole's operation. "Your case was apparently just the tip of the iceberg," Agent Walsh explained. Ms. Patterson had been operating what amounts to a family financial crime business, helping relatives hide assets and evade taxes for several years. The federal charges against Rachel expanded to include additional counts of conspiracy and operating a continuing criminal enterprise, which could result in up to 25 years in federal prison. The media attention the case generated in Charlotte's real estate and legal communities became so intense that I eventually decided to relocate to Austin, Texas, where I could build my business without constantly being reminded of Nicole's betrayal and fraud. Local newspapers had picked up the story when the federal charges were announced, and it became one of those cautionary tales that lawyers and financial advisors would reference when discussing the importance of asset protection in marriage. The Thompson case, as it became known in local legal circles, was being used in continuing education seminars for attorneys and accountants as an example of how sophisticated financial fraud could be uncovered through proper digital forensics and documentation. Mike told me that our case had already been cited in 3 other divorce proceedings where hidden cryptocurrency assets were suspected, helping other victims protect themselves from similar schemes. Moving to Austin turned out to be exactly the fresh start I needed to build something meaningful from the wreckage of my marriage. My software development company grew rapidly in a city that appreciated both technical innovation and financial security, and I found myself working with clients who valued the kind of methodical planning and attention to detail that Nicole had once claimed made me boring. Within a year, Thompson Digital Solutions had 15 employees and contracts with major firms throughout Texas, building the kind of stable, profitable business that represented everything I'd actually wanted from my marriage: partnership, growth, and shared success based on honest work rather than deception and theft. The best part was that every day I went to work building systems that protected people from financial fraud, I was reminded that Nicole's attempt to destroy my life had actually revealed strengths and capabilities I'd never known I possessed. The case officially closed 2 years after I first overheard those late-night planning conversations, when Rachel was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and Nicole received 3 years plus supervised probation for her cooperation in the expanded investigation. I learned about their sentencing through a brief email from Agent Walsh, and I felt nothing but distant satisfaction that justice had been served appropriately. Nicole had lost everything she tried to steal and more, while I'd built a successful business, moved to a city I loved, and learned never to trust someone whose love was conditional on financial benefits. Sometimes the universe's sense of justice works exactly as it should, turning someone's attempt to destroy you into the foundation for building something better than they could ever have imagined.